along Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the show, teachers are leaving faster than they're being replaced, especially in districts with fewer resources. We'll talk about ways to fix the pipeline.
We'll also look at housing for older adults in Detroit. Even without soaring home prices, nearly half of the city's seniors are struggling to afford the homes they already live in.
Then we widen the cultural lens. Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance is more than entertainment. It's a moment about visibility, language, and Latino culture.
Labor under strain, housing under pressure, and a cultural moment that signals who America is listening to. This is the Metro.
We begin in classrooms across Michigan, where most everyone wants students to have good teachers. But how do we adequately prepare educators and keep them in the profession? That's a pressing question as teacher retention drops in Michigan, and it's the most pressing in school districts with more poverty. 10 years ago, only a handful of Michigan school districts reported permanent teacher vacancies. Today, that number has exploded. Over 150 districts now have jobs they can't fill. Some in the state are trying to fix this. Jack Elsey leads the Michigan Educator Workforce Initiative. His nonprofit is launching a collaboration with some public universities in the state to change the way teachers are trained and to keep them in the field. And Jack joins me now. Jack, welcome.
Good morning.
So first, I think we have to address the big problem here of why teacher retention is so bad in the first place.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of challenges with the job, and we also know that there are some data points that we can speak to that tell us exactly why there might be more teachers leaving and fewer teachers maybe going into the profession than we experienced 10, 15, 20 years ago. We know that on par, salaries are less competitive now than they were in the 1990s. We know retirement packages, for instance, are less competitive. There are some districts that are doing something about that. The state is having those conversations as well, which we're encouraged by. And the job has changed. The expectations of the job are different now, particularly post-pandemic. I think if you talk to educators you know and your family and your friends, they'll say, I don't know what it is, but kids are different right now. And that means that teachers need a different set of skills than maybe we have traditionally prepared them for.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of educators about this, and it has me wondering if teachers need perhaps more social work training, more psychology training. And I do want to get to some of the things you mentioned, such as compensation, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into why so much is expected of teachers today than compared to the early 2000s. You mentioned the pandemic, which in education circles, that is looked at as this turning point where everything shifted.
Yeah, I think, for the first time in our country, maybe at any sort of meaningful scale, parents, families, guardians all over the country had insight into what was happening in, virtual classrooms in the case of the pandemic, but classrooms, period. They were seeing teachers interact with their children. They were seeing their own children interact with their teacher. And that, I think, changed some of the dynamic that exists in education. And kids were not getting a traditional classroom experience, many of them in critical developmental ages, and many of them for multiple years even. And so, we can't pretend that wouldn't have some kind of effect. Obviously, it's different child to child, family to family, school to school. But it does change what kids are used to, the expectations, et cetera, when you miss those foundational years of what it means to show up in school as a student and, act accordingly. That has downhill consequences, right, for the older grades as well.
Do you think we're right to be expecting so much of teachers? Should we be relaxing our standards a bit?
Well, I'm not sure that the best way to frame it is in terms of relaxing standards or expecting more of our teachers. I think what we're all acknowledging as educators is that the way we prepare teachers, the way we design teacher roles in schools probably needs to adapt for our current students, our current families, and frankly, our current economies, right? AI is on the scene now. That means different things for what kids need to know how to do. And it means teachers need to know what AI is and what roles it might play, not just now and not just in their classrooms, but in their students' future lives.
Can you give me an example, go a little bit deeper here? I mean, you mentioned AI, but another example of ways you think we can better prepare teachers.
Absolutely. We have learned over the last 5 or so years that there is a way to teach reading to children that works. It is called the science of reading. That's right.
Sorry, I had to jump in there because
it.
we talk about that on this show pretty frequently.
Absolutely. And districts across the state, including the state itself and the Michigan Department of Ed, have taken great strides to help teachers learn how to, adopt these science of reading curricula in their classrooms and hopefully get kids reading much sooner, much better than they are now. Michigan's reading scores, as we know, have slipped recently. That kind of transformation also needs to happen, is happening in some places, not all places, when teachers are in their pre-service training. So when they enroll in an education school, for instance. What goes along with the science of reading are also assessments. So are kids learning what we're teaching them, right? Are they learning how to read?
Could you distill for our listeners what the science of reading actually is if you had to explain it in just a couple sentences?
Yeah, I think for most Americans, it is a way to teach phonics in a way that helps students both develop what the letter sounds are, what the words, how you blend those letter sounds together to make words, and how you can learn how to comprehend those words over time.
Okay. And so we're talking about making some shifts in how we prepare teachers. And part of making that shift too is how we not only prepare them, but how we support them.
100%.
I'm thinking about the fact that teachers tend to leave the field within their first few years on the job. Talk about why that is.
Well, there are a few reasons why. We talked about the economics not keeping up. So teacher salaries potentially not keeping a pace. One thing you can do to solve that is raise teacher pay. That's hard to do. It costs a lot of money to do that statewide. It should be done, let me be clear, right? But it's hard to do. You can also subsidize the cost of education on the front end to getting a teacher certification and getting a bachelor's degree. Right now, it costs the same to go to, say, Michigan State University if you want to be a teacher or an engineer. But we know those careers mean much different,
incomes.
Hugely different incomes,
Yes.
right, in the long run for each of those careers. And so the programs that we have launched, whether it's, we're helping to launch Talent Together or My Early Apprentice or some of these other programs that cover the costs of college for teachers, help make sure that when teachers become, a teacher in their own classroom for the first time, they're not saddled with so much debt that preoccupies their brains most of the time, right? As a first-generation college graduate myself, I had college debt. It's preoccupying. It takes a lot of your time and energy, and we think that with much more practical experience in classrooms as a part of the training experience, once you become a first-year teacher, we hope to change what it means to be a first-year teacher. It used to be, here's your classroom, straight out of ed school. Good luck, right?
Throwing you to the wolves.
That's right.
The little baby wolves.
And now what is different is districts do have expectations around curriculum. They do want trained educators coming into their classrooms, even in the first year, understanding what a good science of reading curriculum looks like, how to use those assessments, how to diagnose children, et cetera. And they're not always getting that, right? And so part of the EPP collaborative that we just announced, the Educator Preparation Program collaborative that we just announced, is to work with our state's leading universities to help update, innovate the way they train teachers to make sure more teachers have more practical experience and have the tools they need for today's classrooms.
Okay, so again, this is called the Education Preparation Providers Collaborative. This is the new initiative that you're leading. You're partnering with Northern, Eastern, Western, and Central Michigan, in addition to Michigan State. You're not partnering with Wayne State or the University of Michigan. I'm wondering why not?
Well, I mean, we put out the invitation to lots of universities. I can't speak to any particular universities and why they're not a part of this first cohort. Although I think it's fair to say we would love to work with any university, right? That is preparing teachers for our state. I think what is true about the 5 universities that we're working with is collectively they produce about 4,000 new teachers a year for our state, which is about 1,000 teachers a year for our state, which is about 40% of the new teachers in our state every year collectively. So, in our effort to make big systemic changes in the way we prepare teachers, we think these 5 universities are a really great place to start.
If you had to sell us on this collaborative, what would you say are the main 3 points that you think are going to be most transformative when it comes to working with these schools?
Yeah. Number 1 is we ought to listen to the practitioners on the ground, the teachers, the school district leaders, in hearing what they need in a new teacher and what they are looking for our state's universities to produce. And we ought to incorporate that feedback into the developmental process for our new teachers.
So listening to the people on the ground who know this best.
Correct. And we're creating structures to help these 4 institutions do that even more effectively than they're doing it now. Number 2 is we need to find ways to increasingly build in more practical experience for our training teachers in classrooms with real kids. We also know from the Michigan State EPIC report that was released that teacher retention, particularly new teacher retention, is lower in our schools that need them the most. The rural schools, the urban schools, the schools that are high needs, serve high needs children. And so making sure that more of our teachers in training at the educator preparation programs have real experience with children, high needs children, before they get their own classroom, we think will lead to more success in year 1 and longer term retention.
Right, because as I've heard from educators, I mean, nothing can really prepare you for the job like being there in the classroom. You can hit the books and study as focused as possible. It's there's nothing like that real world classroom experience being in front of students. I want to think a little bit more about why we don't pay teachers like we used to. I mean, I was looking at some statistics this morning. The average starting salaries for teachers are roughly $39,000 to $46,000. That sounds really low. That sounds like a huge barrier to getting people into the profession. Why did we stop paying teachers like we did in the 1990s?
Yeah, I'm not sure there was a singular moment where we decided this wasn't important anymore. I think what it's important to remember is that in the 1990s and particularly in the early 2000s, you almost couldn't get a job if you were a new teacher coming out of a school of education. It was so competitive.
Wow.
And so I went to college in North Carolina, and I remember districts in North Carolina recruiting Michigan graduates because Michigan graduates couldn't get a job in their home state. And you'll hear this story from lots of educators around the state. And so I do think at some level we sort of took that for granted. The pipeline was thriving. People wanted to be teachers. They saw it. They saw a teaching career as a viable career, could raise a family, et cetera. And then, we all know what happened in the mid 2000s and into 2010 with the economic crash, the tax revenue pressures, the pressures on districts to do more with less, and something has to give. In any district's budget, teachers are their largest line item by far, and so when you when you have those financial pressures, when other costs go up, as we know, we're dealing with inflation right now, the costs of maintaining buildings, of gas for buses, like the whole, there's a whole big picture that districts have to contend with here financially. It makes it harder to systemically raise teacher pay. I'm not sure there's a superintendent in the state who doesn't want to raise teacher pay, but they also have to make sure that students are provided with the services that they need.
Again, that starting salary is around $39,000. What do you think it should be?
Well, that's a complicated question.
Sure.
But I do know, our friends at EPIC at Michigan State say essentially if we were on par from a buying power perspective right now as we were in the 90s, if we were on par with that rate, teachers would be making about 30% more. So that seems like a pretty good starting place for us to explore. And I know that there are legislators and education leaders across the state who are having that very conversation.
I want to think more about some of the reasons that teachers are not getting paid what many people think they should be. Michigan has a lot more charter schools than it did decades ago, and charter schools aren't unionized like public schools are. I'm wondering if that had anything to do with the reason that teachers are paid less on average today, again, than they were decades ago in the 1990s.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the governance model is as much of a driver as the financial model. We also know that the per student allocation from the state to schools, which is virtually the same across all governance systems, did not increase at the rate to keep up with costs, did
That's
not
right.
increase at the rate to allow districts to elevate teacher pay, districts or charter networks. And so there are some underlying just truths about, do districts have enough money, do charter networks have enough money to give teachers the kinds of raises that they would want to give them? I think a lot of district leaders would say no right now. But they're hopeful, right, that there are some more systemic solution type conversations happening in our state right now.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear from a lot of education advocates, they applaud the small victories of seeing the per pupil allowance go up, even though it has gone up just a small amount, but it's still something. But then others who want to be more pointed say, well, we should be taking from other things to invest more in education. Can I put you in the hot seat on that? Would you agree? Do you see places? I mean, is that a little bit out of your wheelhouse to ask you if you see places that the state is focusing on that you'd maybe like to see less focus on and more on education?
Well, look, I wouldn't be. I started off my career as a middle school teacher, and I wouldn't be an educator if I didn't say there are lots of needs and all of them should be met. Now, that's easy for me to say in my seat, right, because I don't manage our state's budget. But I think it is true. Schools are expected to do a lot for children, and the costs of doing those things, whether it's putting a roof over their head during the school day hours or getting them to school via transportation or feeding them, at lunchtime and other meals, et cetera, the costs of those things are going up. And so it's hard for me to say we shouldn't do those things. We shouldn't obviously invest in those things and also invest in our teachers. I know that doesn't sound like a fair budget model, if you will, but it's from a principle standpoint, from a value standpoint, it's hard not to say we shouldn't make sure that Michigan schools are the best in the country.
Jack, you said you started as a middle school teacher. Why did you become a teacher?
I became a teacher because, as a first-generation college student myself, the power of a great teacher, the power of a great school was something that was so deeply embedded in me. And I felt almost an obligation, because I had been so well served by educators who served me, to do the same for children that I knew, particularly in the schools I was working in, but all around the country, there are a lot of children that do not have access to a great education, and I wanted to do my part.
Reminds me of something my mom likes to say. She's a former educator, and she talks about the power of a great teacher and how that can be transformative in a child's life. But what you're saying is, if kids are not experiencing that power, we're not sending the message from an early age that becoming a teacher even is a meaningful, mission-driven type of profession. So it's starting really early. The teacher pipeline, we're telling kids from a young age that this is not a meaningful career.
We say all the time, the best billboard for the teaching profession is a great teacher in front of a child every day. How many children do we meet who the first job they say they want to do is a teacher, because the first person that they admire and idolize is their teacher? And that won't happen in classrooms where, as you cited the statistic earlier, where there are permanent vacancies all year long, where there is a rotating, list of substitute teachers throughout the year. That doesn't allow that fundamental student-teacher relationship to be created, and it doesn't allow for that child to say, I want to be Miss So-and-so one day, right? Like, that's a really powerful thing to say. And a lot of kids say that in second grade and end up becoming a teacher, in after college, right? Because of their early experiences. We really want more of that to be true for our Michigan children.
I want to end on a solutions-based lens here, because your initiative is looking to halt teacher shortage in the long run. But I'm wondering, what could we be doing tomorrow to ensure teachers stop leaving the field? Yeah,
one thing we are doing is we have a partnership with Arizona State University, and they have learned a lot about team teaching in the last 5 years or so. And we are working with about a dozen districts across the state right now who are literally exploring and changing the teacher role itself. So rather than having teachers isolated one classroom for 30, with 30 students, we have 5 teachers for 150 kids, and they dynamically group those students throughout the day. They talk about each student's progress. They build authentic relationships. Somebody in that third grade team of teachers is the best reading teacher, so they're going to teach more kids how to read. Somebody's the best math teacher, so they're going to teach more kids how to do math. We think what we hear anecdotally and in survey results, time and again, and student achievement results, teachers are happier. They feel like they're part of a community. They don't carry the stress if they have a family emergency of calling out and knowing some substitute who doesn't know their kids is going to be there for the day. The other 4 teachers say, we don't need the substitute. We've got it. That has for so many educators, certainly those who have been doing it for 5+ years in Arizona, but even the ones we're working with here in the state, we've started to see some signs that this might be the kind of job that not only current teachers, that will fulfill current teachers and make them want to stay longer, but will meet the current, younger generation's demands of the working world.
So it's about creating support and camaraderie right now.
And by doing that, helping students do better in school, which is what every teacher wants to be true.
Jack Elsey is the founder and CEO of the Michigan Educator Workforce Initiative. Jack, thank you so much for joining me on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
It's the Metro on WDET. Coming up, if Detroit's housing prices are relatively low, why are so many seniors still struggling just to stay in their homes? We'll look at what's really driving housing costs for older adults in the city and what might actually make a difference. Stay with us.